All right, we're recording now. Somebody could let me know that you Zoomers can hear me.
Yes, sir. I can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Hopefully you got the email I sent yesterday. The exam will be on the 24th, which is a week from today. It will be over chapter 11, which we've spent a lot of time on because it's very important. I say it's more important than the length in the textbook. So it's very important. Also, we will, the exam will cover chapter 12 and 13. I'm not sure if we'll get through all of 13, but we will cover at least a good chunk of it. And I think we can cover all of it. I might put up a short video if we don't get through some parts of it. Let's see. Remember, you can use the 3x5 index card as before. Oh, I knew there was something I wanted to mention. After Thanksgiving, we will not be meeting face-to-face. We'll be fully remote, which means you will be taking your exam remotely. We will be using not ProctorU, but I think it's called Monitor EDU. And there is a specific time, and I forgot to bring the time, but I will tell you on Thursday, specific time that the university has allotted for us to take the exam. So it will be important that you take it when it is scheduled. And you will need to set that up before the exam. I'll have to set it up first, and then you will be able to set it up. I don't have a lot of experience with Monitor EDU. I've only had one student who used it this semester and had absolutely no problems. ProctorU, on the other hand, had a lot of problems, but we won't be using that. So, well, ProctorU used to be good. Then in the spring, they rolled out a new system, ProctorU Review Plus, that had all kinds of problems. And so this semester, we've gone back to the regular ProctorU, which is ProctorU Live Plus. For some reason, it's not going well. For some people, it works fine, but I've had a number of students who have had difficulty. Anyway, you won't have to worry about that with this class. And I will put up an email later today that'll give you the time that you'll be taking that. Well, something else I was going to tell you, but I don't. Oh, I do have a study guide that I have pretty much finished for chapter 11, and there'll probably be one for chapter 13. I haven't put those up yet, but I should be able to do that tonight, so it should be up tomorrow. Okay. All right, now back to chapter 11. And let's step back. So we're going to talk in terms of there being 4 types of markets. The first is the competitive market or price taker market, a pure competition market. That's what we've been spending most of our time on, chapter 11. Okay. Second type of market will be monopoly, where you only have one firm, and that will be on this exam. Third type of market, which will be on the final, but not this exam, is monopolistic competition, which has elements of monopoly, but elements of competition. And then the fourth is oligopoly, which is kind of a different thing altogether. But that won't be on this exam, that will be on the final. If you understand the price taker model, that really gives you the, although in some ways you could look at it and say, well, that's not realistic for many markets. But it does give you conclusions that really give you an understanding of how competition, how competitive market economies function. And so we were looking at price taker market, long run equilibrium. We said it's going to look like this. We'll just review what we did at the end last time. We said in a price taker market, the price is determined by market supply, market demand. That's showing, remember, market supply is showing you how much all of the firms in the market collectively will supply. Okay? The market supply curve is the summation of all the individual firm supply curves. Okay? You look at, for a price of $6.99, how much will firm 1 produce? How much will firm produce? You add all those together, that gives you the total. For example, let me put in a number. Let's say that this is firm 1 and it's choosing to produce 80 units. Well, just to simplify, let's say that you've got 1,000 firms in this market and they're all identical. Well, then that means if the price is $6.99, firm 1 is going to produce 80 units, firm 2, everyone produces 80. So in total, the quantity produced would be 80,000. So that's showing the link between what firms are doing and what's happening in the overall market. All of the actions of all the consumers, all the producers determine what the price is going to be. But then the individual firm says, well, that price is my marginal revenue. So each firm says, I can't choose the price, but I can choose the quantity. I'm going to produce where MR equals MC. So he chooses to produce here. He's maximizing profit. He's getting as much profit as he can get. And how much is the profit?
It's going to be equal to the EMC is going to have to equal the market revenue.
Well, the marginal cost is equal. Well, marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost here because the firm is choosing to produce there. But in this long run equilibrium, in a competitive market, how much profit is the firm earning? Profit equals price minus average cost times quantity. You want to be sure you've got that on the tip of your tongue all the time. So when we're here, this firm is producing 80 units. Its marginal cost is $6.99. Its price is $6.99. Its average cost is $6.99. Price and average cost are equal. So how much profit is it making?
6.
Zero. Zero. And that is why this is the long run equilibrium. Because in long run equilibrium, firms aren't making positive profit. They're not losing money. Their profit has been driven down to zero. Is that what the firms want? No, that's the key thing to recognize. This is not what they want. This is where competition pushes us. It's because of the firms competing against each other for profits that their goal is they are prevented from achieving their goal of making positive profit. Okay? They are maximizing, or each firm is maximizing its individual profit, but the result, because of the competition, is that they end up with no profit at all. And then we said, well, how do we get to this outcome? And we asked, well, if we start out here, which is where we were in the previous example, $6.99, we're there, we're here, and consumers decide they want more of this product, well, that does create an opportunity for firms to make profit. Okay? Demand, I can't overstate how important it is to be able to think through the sequence we're going through here, one step at a time, and do it right every time, because you absolutely will need to do that on the exam. Think about what's happening. We're assuming that consumers now want more of this product, and because of that one change, a whole series of things begin to happen. Okay? Because demand increases, the equilibrium moves from here up to there, which means the price is higher. Price is $7.99, which means over on the firm side, each price taker says, well, before the demand curve I faced was down here. I could sell as much as I wanted at $6.99. Now the demand curve, is up here. I can sell as much as I want for $7.99 each. My marginal revenue is now $7.99. So to maximize profit, each firm says, I want to produce where my marginal revenue is, or where my marginal cost is $7.99, because that's what will give me maximum profit. And it's at point B where MR and MC are now equal. QA was the quantity that would give the firm the maximum profit before. But now that consumers want more of this product, firms have an incentive to produce more. It's not that they care about the consumer. They have an incentive to give the consumer what the consumer wants, and they get that incentive through the higher price. And the price is pushed up because of demand, the increase in demand. In the short run, remember, a short run is a period of time that is too short for any entry to occur. And so in the short run, new firms can't come in even if they want to, but the existing firms can expand output. So consumers will get more in the short run because the existing firms decide we'll produce more. Okay? But that's not the whole story, because once the price has gone up to $7.99, once firms are producing here, okay, what happens next?
Everybody sees the fact, or in the short term, they see the $7.99 price, and then other producers want to get in.
Why do other producers want to get in?
They see the flare's gone up, price is going up, so.
Okay, they see the price is the flare that's signaling consumers value this more. That gets the attention. But we need to think more than just the price, okay? Because what is it the firms want? They want profit. And so the higher price means that, again, go back to what is profit, price minus average cost times quantity. If you're not sick of writing this equation, you should be ashamed, because you need to write that equation. It's one thing to look at it, it's another thing to write it. You need to write it over. Every time I write it, you need to write it twice. Right? Because the more you write it, the more it will burn itself into your memory and you'll remember it. The price is now higher. The firm is producing more output. It's what's happened to its average cost.
You have costs also going, because they're using more stuff to make more things.
Well, they're producing more, and we have to find average cost. We have to look at what is their average cost at the new quantity. So at the new quantity, we read up, the average cost is here, price is here. Clearly, price is above average cost. That means this term is positive, which means firms in this market are making positive profit. And if it were up, if the producers in this market could vote, do we want to let anybody else come into this market and start competing with us? They would vote no. We want to limit entry. But if it's a competitive market, new firms can come in and start producing. The existing firms don't want that, but entry is great for who?
That's for the consumer.
Consumers. Consumers are going to benefit. So what we see here is what happens in the short run. You have higher price, increase in output from existing firms. They are making profit. They're happy. That's great. The existence of that profit immediately creates the incentive for entry. It's not that firms just wait around and then later on they say, oh, let's enter. No, it takes time to enter. As soon as they see this profit potential, they start the process of entering, but it takes a while before they can actually start producing. Once the entry occurs, that is represented here by the shift. Remember, the industry supply curve is showing you how much will be produced by all of the firms in total. And we said if each firm is producing 80 per, if each firm is producing 80 units, and if you got 1,000 firms, you get 80,000 units. Well, if you get another 200 firms or 300 firms coming in, you're going to get more output. That's what is happening here. The higher price created the profit. The profit leads to entry. The entry is represented by the rightward shift of the supply curve. And as the supply curve shifts, what happens to the price? The price goes down. Price was here. In the short run, it goes up to here. That produces the entry, shifts the supply curve, and the price starts going back down. That takes time. Over here, we started at A. Price went up, which means the firm expanded outputs, giving consumers more of what they wanted, but they had to pay a higher price to get it. But consumers were able to get more. But then as the profit leads to entry, the price comes back down. As the price goes back down, remember this is the marginal revenue curve. That was at first. This was the new one. But as the price comes back down, what does the marginal revenue curve do? Now, remember the marginal revenue for price taker firms, marginal revenue is just equal to the price. So when the price went up, the MR curve shifted up. As the price goes down, the MR curve shifts back down. Okay? The firm was willing to produce QA units before. Price went up, they were willing to produce more. As the price goes back down, they cut back to the amount they were producing before. But in total, industry output increases. How are we getting more output if each firm has cut back to the original quantity? More firms. More firms. Consumers get more output because you've got more firms. And in this case, constant cost industry, the individual firms have gone back to where they were before, but consumers are getting more of the output they want in total because you've got more firms producing here. Okay? Notice consumers get more of what they want because the price goes up and that motivates more entry. What would happen if when the price went up here, if the government said, well, this is not fair. These firms, you didn't do anything to deserve this extra profit, so we're going to keep the price down and not let you take advantage of these consumers. If the price was kept down, then the quantity supplied in the short run would remain at Q0 or QA. Okay? So in the short run, consumers would not get more output. And in the long run, if the price is kept down, will there be entry? No, because the entry occurs only once you have the profit being earned. If you keep the price down, then profit doesn't go up, you don't get entry, and so consumers don't get what they want. If the government thinks we're going to help consumers by keeping the price down, what they actually do is preventing consumers from getting the increased output that they want. Good example. Another good example of how intentions can backfire. You can try to help consumers, but you end up doing something that actually hurts them in the long run. All right, we've been talking about an increasing cost or a constant cost, which is the simplest situation, and the most important, I would say, because that really introduces you to all the dynamics of what's happening. Increasing cost industry adds another little wrinkle. This is an industry in which industry costs increase with greater output. Okay? Basically, its cost rise. Each individual firm's cost curves start shifting as industry output is going up. As new firms are entering, then those individual firm cost curves start going up. Okay? This can be because, well, there are a number of reasons why it can occur, but the basic thing is something happens whereas as new firms are entering, costs are being pushed up. It may be, especially any industry that buys a large fraction of the output of an increasing cost industry will also be an increasing cost industry. Like I think I mentioned before, the housing market. Okay? If the housing market expands, then they're going to be using more lumber, and that's likely to push up the price of lumber. And if the price of lumber goes up, then the cost of building houses is going to go up. But it could be anything that, whereas you have more firms entering, that's going to push up the cost curves for individual firms. And here we can see how that's going to work. Oh, forgot one thing. Notice back on the constant cost industry. Notice the long run industry supply curve. Okay? The short run industry supply curve was upward sloping. To get more output, consumers had to pay a higher price. But notice the long run curve.
It's usually flat.
It's flat, okay? Because, where did that long run come from? Well, we started out here where firms were making zero profit, so that was an equilibrium. Consumers could get this quantity if they paid $6.99. If consumers wanted more, that was the increase in demand. In the short run, consumers had to pay a higher price, had to go up to $7.99. Okay? But in the long run, because of entry, we ended up here, which was a second point on the long run supply curve, which meant if there's enough time for entry in this market, consumers can get this quantity for $6.99 each, or it can get this larger quantity for $6.99 each. They can get more output without having to pay a higher price in the long run if it is a constant cost industry. So for the constant cost industry, that will have a horizontal, completely horizontal, long-run industry supply curve. Whereas with an increasing cost industry, it's going to be more complicated. With an increasing cost industry, and here they're taking into account other firms that have differing cost conditions. Here, they are, they're assuming we have two firms. Okay? For it to be a competitive market, you really have to have more than this, but they're just making a point. The industry supply curve shows you how much will be provided at each price by all the firms in the industry. Well, if the price is only $17, look at firm one. Okay? It will choose to produce, because at $17, it can produce 4 units, and its average cost will be $17. So it's able to cover its cost. It'll be willing to do that. Okay? What about firm two?
To cover its costs, it has to charge 29. That's just a break even. That's not.
For firm, that's right. For firm two, to cover its cost, it would have to charge 29. If the price is 17, think about what firm two, think about their decision process. This is a good thing to think through. If you're running firm two, and this is a price taker market, and the price is 17, that means marginal revenue is 17. So you say, well, if we're going to produce where MR equals MC, which means you're going to produce right there, because that is where marginal revenue, the $17 price, is equal to the marginal cost. Okay? So then you ask, well, and let's say this is 2 units. Once you found where MR equals MC, then you ask, well, should we produce at all? Or would it be better to not produce? And to determine that, you've got to look at average cost. Well, if you're producing 2 units, where's your average cost? It's way up here. Okay? So clearly, this firm cannot make profit if the price is only 17. So this second firm would not produce anything, okay, if the price were 17. So you, in the industry, you'd only have one firm. It would produce 4, and that's where we're getting this point. Okay? If the price goes up to 29, then notice this firm will choose to produce 6 units. Second firm now will choose to produce where MR equals MC, and that is at a quantity of 5. Their average cost will be 29, so they are able to cover their cost, so they will be willing to produce. So you're going to get 6 and 5, you're going to get 11 units of output. That's where this is coming from. If the price is 50, this firm is going to produce 8, this firm is going to produce 7, so you're going to get in total 15. Okay? Because you're getting increases in cost as this entry is occurring, that is what is giving you the upward sloping supply curve. Okay? This would be an example of an increase in cost industry. To summarize, for a constant cost industry, and these are things you want to know and you want to really understand. Don't just memorize it. Okay? You don't know why it's true. Send me a question or set up a Zoom session, because you need to understand these things. In a constant cost industry, price is driven down to average cost. So profits are driven down to normal levels, and normal levels are 0. Okay, doesn't mean 0 accounting profit. It means 0 economic profit. However, in the long run, consumers can get more output without having to pay a higher price. Okay? In the constant cost market, the long run supply curve is completely horizontal. So the consumers, if demand increases, consumers can get more output without even having to pay a higher price because entry is going to occur. Whereas in an increasing cost industry, price is driven down to average cost. So profits are driven down to normal levels, okay, which again would be zero. Okay, so no difference there. However, in the long run, for the increasing cost industry, to get more output, consumers have to pay higher prices. Why? Because for the increasing cost industry, the long run supply curve is going to be upward sloping. So when you get the increase in demand, it takes a higher price to motivate that extra production. Okay. In both of these, though, notice consumers benefit from competition. Okay? In both types industries, consumer in the long run, consumers get the product they want, and they get it at a price that is so low that it's just sufficient to cover the firm's average cost. In both of these types of markets, the profit is driven down to zero. Okay? Now, does that mean that if you have a firm, does that mean that a firm should say, oh, well, we're in a price taker market, so we're not going to make any profit in the long run, so there's no point if you keep trying. Okay? No, it doesn't mean that. We're talking about where the market will tend to go in the long run. And we can say to an individual firm, if you work really hard and if you find a better way to produce the product, and you're the first to find this better way to improve it, then your costs are going to go down and your profits are going to go up. Are those higher profits likely to last forever? Probably not, because you figured it out how to produce more at a lower cost. Probably other firms are going to figure it out too, and eventually they're going to catch on and prices are going to be pushed down. But for a period of time, if you are really innovative, you can make more profit. So there is an incentive for firms to look for new and better ways to produce the product. Plus, we're saying that in the long run, profit gets pushed to zero. What's going to happen to a firm that gets lazy and doesn't adopt the best technology? They're going to get left behind. If other firms find a way to lower their costs and you don't, then your costs are going to be higher than theirs. Their profits will get pushed to zero, and your profit will get pushed to negative, and you'll end up having to go out of business. So firms do have an incentive to try to make more profit, even though in the long run, those profits are likely to be eliminated. Okay, third possibility, we won't spend much time on this, a decreasing cost industry. This is an industry where something is going on, whereas the industry's output is increasing, costs are decreasing. And that can lead to a downward sloping industry supply curve. Your book talks about the idea of industry clusters, where you can have a bunch of firms who are producing the same thing that cluster together in one area. And because of that, as the quantity grows, there can be some economies. For example, they talk about Dalton, Georgia, the carpet capital of the world, which I had not heard of. When you have lots of carpets being produced in a certain area, well, then the suppliers then can cluster in the same area and can experience economies of scale, which can lower their cost and lead to a lower price for the input.
So wouldn't that attract not just, say, a producer, but anybody who has an interest in it to try out the carpet industry?
So you're saying, wouldn't that attract entry?
Yeah.
Well, it would attract entry, because with the decreasing cost industry, you're still going to end up with zero profit in the long run. Okay? But the fact that you have these economies mean as the industry output's going up, costs are going down.
An economy of scale.
And so it's an economy of scale in the production of the input. And so for the consumer, it means that as the quantity being produced is going up, the price they have to pay can actually go down. And they suggest Silicon Valley could be the same type of thing, where you have this cluster of computer and technology companies in a particular part of California, which is largely, as far as I can tell, moving to a particular part of Texas. The same kind of thing can happen. It produces cost reductions, which can give you a negatively sloped industry demand curve, but they suggest that these are likely to be temporary. So for a period of time, you may have this negatively sloped industry supply curve, but the norm is going to be constant cost or increasing cost. And so here they show the three possibilities. Increasing costs can be upward sloping. Constant cost is going to be horizontal. And then I'm not sure why they have this backward S thing. If it's truly decreasing cost, then it's going to be downward sloping. Okay.
Well, I think it's maybe because of the temporary nature of the downward slope.
Yeah, that's what they mean. But what you really want to understand is the constant cost, where we show the dynamics of how a competitive market works. That's the most important thing. Industry in which industry costs do not change with greater output is called a constant cost industry.
I was going to guess that.
All right, just one more example to things you want to be sure you understand. In the short run, if you have an industry right here, and there's an increase in demand, you need to be able to look at a graph like this and talk through it, explain what's happening. If there's an increase in demand, then what the sequence is critically important, because one thing leads to the next, and that leads to the next. Here we would say, if demand increases, then the price goes up. When the price goes up, the existing firms expand output. That's how you're getting the expansion here. Because the price is higher, the existing firms are now experiencing profit. That profit motivates outside firms to come in and start producing. As those outside firms enter, the short run supply curve gradually shifts to the right. As that happens, the price goes down. We end up here, industry output is greater. Consumers wanted more of this product, they get more of this product, and they don't even have to pay a higher price if this is a constant cost industry. The individual firms, they cut back to what they were producing before, but because we have more firms in the market, consumers are getting more, even though the individual firms are producing no more than before. Okay. You want to be able to draw those graphs that you see here and talk through them. That's really important. We started out here and here, where profit was zero. we end up here and here, where profit is again 0. Okay? What if consumers decrease their demands? They don't want as much of the product. That's really important to understand as well, because a lot of times when there's a decrease in the demand for a product and the businesses are struggling, people tend to think, oh, well, the government's got to do something to save these people. I saw an article just today about the big increase in firms that are filing for bankruptcy because of things that have happened in the last half year. Okay? And it's certainly painful to the workers and to the owners when that happens. If the government had a magic wand they could wave and make that pain go away, I would say do it, no doubt. We have to recognize that the only way the government can help one business is by hurting somebody else. Okay? And they can't make the pain go away, they can just redistribute it. Okay? And so we need to understand that when there's a decrease in the demand for something, the world will not end if the government doesn't do anything. Okay? Here, we start out here, we're in long-run equilibrium, 0 profit. If consumers decide we don't want as much of this, the demand decreases. In the short run, the price goes down. As the price goes down, the marginal revenue curve, which is the same as the price line, it goes down. Okay? Firm wants to produce where MR is equal to MC. It's going to be here. This is going to be the new quantity. We'll just call that Q1. Is the firm, representative firm here, making profit?
As long as their MR equals MC.
No. Really important point to remember. MR equals MC does not guarantee profits. MR equals MC guarantees that you are choosing the quantity that gives as much profit as you can get, but it doesn't guarantee that profit's going to be positive, because as we have here, when the price goes down, MR equals MC is now at Q1, but we have to ask, well, what is average cost at Q1? We read up to the AC curve. Clearly, average cost is greater than the price. This firm is going to lose money. The firms in this market have a great case for saying to the government, we are losing money. And you know, if something doesn't improve, we're going to go out of business. And often the government says, oh, we can't have that. People lose jobs, so you know, we'll do something to help you. Okay? They don't say, and we'll impose a problem on somebody else in order to help you. Is it correct that some of these firms are going to go out of business? Absolutely. That's not the end of the world. Now, if it's your business, it may feel like the end of the world. But in a market economy, prices create signals which motivate producers to produce what consumers want. And when consumers change what they want, firms have to adjust. And here, the owner of this firm is getting the message: consumers don't value your product enough to pay you enough to keep you in business. Because the average cost is here and the price is down here, this firm is losing money. And if the firm expects this to continue, then at some point this firm is going to say, we're going to go out of business. Okay? Now, whether they go out immediately or whether they wait for a while will depend on what their fixed costs are, their average variable costs. But if they think this is permanent, then they're losing money. Some of them are going to go out of business. But will all of them go out of business? No, that's a key thing to recognize, that the producers may go to the government and say, this is, if these are cheese producers, you got to bail us out, because if you don't, the country won't have any cheese. Okay? No, if the government doesn't do anything, some of these producers will go out of business, but that's an automatic adjustment that is necessary, because the losses being earned here lead to exit. Profit leads to entry, losses lead to exit. When you have firms entering the market, supply shifts to the right. When you have firms leaving the market, supply shifts to the left. Okay? And as the supply curve is shifting to the left, what's going to happen to the price? Going to drop?
As firms leave the market?
As firms are leaving the market. That's a shift to the left. Because of the losses being earned here, over time, some firms go out of business. That represents a decrease in short-run industry supply. And as supply is shifting left, the price starts going back up. Okay? And as the price starts going back up, it becomes more profitable to operate in this market. Okay? So some of the firms are going to go out of business. Okay? But if this is a constant cost industry, the price, enough will go out of business so that the price will go back up to where it was before, so that they can once again cover, they can once again cover their cost. Okay? They started out in long-run equilibrium, covering their cost. Decrease in demand means you need fewer producers in this market. Okay? And the producers who choose to go out of business are going to be the ones who are the least efficient. And they need to go out of business. The government doesn't need to say, well, how can we keep all of them in business? Think about what happened to people who made buggies when the automobile came along. If the government said we got to protect these firms, we'd still have buggy producers today. Okay? Things change, and in a market economy, prices and profit create signals which facilitates that change. If the government doesn't intervene and say, we're going to protect somebody from the changes that are occurring. Right? If the government stays out of it, some of the firms are going to go out of business, but once the adjustment has occurred, the price is going to go back to where it was, and the surviving firms are going to be able to cover their cost. You don't need government to intervene just because firms are losing money. Think about the airline industry today. If you look at the number of people traveling by air, it dropped to almost zero. And it's still dramatically lower than what it used to be. And it's probably going to continue to be lower than it used to be. And that probably means we don't need as many airlines. And that's painful to people who own airline stock, and it's painful to people who work for airlines, but that's just the reality. If people don't want as many flights, then you don't need as many airplanes flying. And somebody's going to have to make an adjustment. Okay? Now, if you want to say the government should provide some kind of assistance for people who lose their jobs, okay, so unemployment benefits or job retraining benefits, that's a whole separate issue. Okay, but I'm not saying that would be a bad thing. But what is a bad thing is to look at a market where firms are losing money and say, well, we just got to find a way so that these failing firms won't fail. That's just a bad economic policy. Okay, questions on any of that? All right.
I'll ask after class.
Huh?
I'll ask after class.
Okay. Chapter 12. There's some really good stuff in here. It's not going to take a long time to go through it, but there is some good stuff here. And very timely.
I did those sampling assignments so long ago.
Review. Okay, let's see. Okay, there, chapter 12, competition and the invisible hand. And really there are 2 points, 2 principles that we're going to focus on. Under competitive conditions, and these shouldn't be surprising, but they're a little more precise maybe than we've talked about before. Under competitive conditions, entrepreneurs have incentives to produce outcomes which have desirable properties. Namely, that here we're stating these properties, and we're going to go back and explain, show how we reach these conclusions. Number 1, the price equal marginal cost condition balances production across firms in a way that minimizes total industry cost of production. Okay? What that's saying is that when you have a competitive markets, the total cost of producing whatever quantity is produced, maybe you've got 1,000 firms and they're producing 1 million units. The total cost of producing those 1 million units will be minimized. Even though there's nobody trying to minimize the total cost, you got each firm trying to minimize its own or to maximize its own profit. We're going to see that because of what they're doing, the unintended result is that the total cost of producing the quantity produced will be minimized. And we're also going to ask, what if government were doing this? Would government be able to achieve the same outcome? And then the second principle, entry and exit conditions balance production across different industries in a way that maximizes the total value of production. Okay? First principle is dealing with simply minimizing the total cost of producing whatever is produced in a particular industry. Second principle is saying the end result of all this competitive activity is that the maximum value for consumers is going to be achieved. And we'll show how we reach that conclusion. Okay, for the first one, these are things that we're assuming or we have already shown. All firms in a perfectly competitive industry face the same market price. Well, that's just part of what it means to be a competitive industry. We've seen that to maximize profit, each firm adjusts output until price equals marginal cost. Well, that's a little bit different from the way I've said it before, because I've always emphasized the firm's going to produce where MR equals MC. Okay? And I emphasize it that way because that is always true for every firm, no matter what kind of market it is. For price taker markets, marginal revenue is just the price. Okay? This will always be true no matter what kind of market you're looking at. This is true only for price taker markets. If you combine the two, if MR is equal to MC and MR is equal to P, the result is that in a competitive market, the price and the marginal cost are going to be equal. Okay, and that may not seem very important. We're going to see it's very important. It has some very important implications. All firms in the okay. Why does it have important implications? Because in a competitive market, no matter how many firms you have, say N firms, firm 1 is producing where its marginal cost is equal to the price. Firm 2 is producing where its marginal cost is equal to price. For every firm, they're producing where their marginal cost is equal to the price. And since they are all facing the same price, that means their marginal costs are all going to be the same. Okay? That is going to demonstrate that total industry costs are going to be at a minimum. Probably don't see it at this point, but we're about to show why this is the key to minimizing total industry costs. And here's our first example. We're going to have, let's see, 1, 2, 3 scenarios. First scenario is where, actually 4 scenarios. First scenario is where you own 2 farms. Okay? Second scenario is where you own a whole bunch of farms. Third scenario is where there are a whole bunch of farms, but you have different owners. Fourth scenario is where you have a whole bunch of farms and the government owns them. Okay? We're going to see that we have some very interesting conclusions. We're going to assume that each farm has a different marginal cost. One farm has a higher cost than the other farm. And we're going to assume that you want to produce in total 200 bushels of wheat. Okay? That's your goal. And here you have the cost curve for farm 1. Here you have the cost curve for farm 2. Okay? Which one looks like it is lower cost? 2. Okay? Because if you produce the 200 bushels with farm 1, marginal cost is going to be $10. You produce it with farm 2, it's only going to be $5. So clearly, if you had to pick, you want to have farm 1 or farm 2, you'd rather have farm 2 because its costs are lower. That could lead you to conclude that you should produce all of your output with the lower cost farm, okay? Because it's got lower cost. That would be an incorrect conclusion. Okay? This is one of those things where what seems obvious, you think about it, you realize, no, it's not even true. Okay? Think about it like this. You got 2 farms. You could produce all of your output with farm 1. You could produce all of it with farm 2. Or you can do some combination of the 2. Okay? Well, first let's consider, well, farm 2 is more efficient, it's lower cost. So what would happen if you just produced all 200 with farm 2?
You have that really slim table.
You've got that, well, okay. If you produce here, then your marginal cost is going to be right here, whatever that number is, okay? And if the choices were produce everything with 1 or everything with 2, you produce everything with 2, okay? But you don't have to choose between those 2 alternatives, okay? Remember, think back to earlier chapters. We have repeatedly said, if you want the total cost of producing some amount of output, you just look at the area under the supply curve. Okay? Supply curve is a marginal cost curve. So the area under the curve represents the cost to producing some number of units. Okay? So you're the owner, you could produce all 200 units with farm 2. Or you could cut back a little here and you could produce a little more here. Okay? If you cut back here, the cost savings is represented by the area in blue. Okay? You're not producing as much, so your costs at Farm 2 go down. You're now producing with Farm 1, so your costs here are going to go up. Okay? But you can see this area, the cost savings is greater than this area, the cost increases. So instead of producing nothing at Farm 1 and 200 at Farm 2, it would be better to cut back a little bit on Farm 2 and increase Farm 1 production. Your costs go down here more than they go up here. Okay? And that may seem like counterintuitive because we said Farm 2 has lower cost. Okay? It has lower cost for any given level of output. But if Farm 1 isn't producing anything and you expand, its costs on the margin are lower than this firm's cost on the margin. Okay? You had a question?
I was going to ask, so would Farm 1 produce up to the blue quantity under the marginal cost curve?
Well, we can't say exactly from this graph, but with this graph, we just want to see the principle that even though Farm 2 is lower cost, you don't want to use it exclusively. You can cut, since the marginal cost of the 200th unit is above the marginal cost for Farm 1 starting at 0, you can lower the total cost by cutting back on Farm 2's output and increasing Farm 1's output. When you do that, marginal cost at Farm 2 starts going down, and the marginal cost at Farm 1 starts going up. Okay? As long as marginal cost here is above the marginal cost here, then when you do this shifting, your cost here go down by more than your cost here go up. So you're reducing your total industry or total group cost. Okay? And the next graph should show this. Yeah, notice if you produce a few bushels less on Farm 2, your costs go down by the area of A. You produce a few more bushels on Farm 1, your costs go up by B. Since A is greater than B, even though you're getting the same total output, your total costs are going down. Okay? And the reason this works is because when you are starting at this point and this point, your marginal cost for Farm 1 is greater than, is less than.
I get those two confused.
Yeah, me too. If we're starting here and here, marginal cost for Farm 1 is lower than marginal cost for Farm 2. Even though Farm 2, we already said it's lower cost in general. But if Farm 2 is producing 200, and Farm 1 is producing nothing, then on the margin, Farm 1 has a lower cost. So you can expand production here, you can reduce production here. Total industry costs go down, even though you're still producing 200 units. And you can see where this is leading us. Okay? Here, this shows if Farm 1 expands out to 75, its marginal costs go up to here. It doesn't say what, let's say it's $50. And for Farm 2, it's cutting back 75, okay? And its marginal costs, which were higher, they're coming down. We're now here and here. Okay? Firm 1's marginal costs have gone up. Firm 2's marginal costs have gone down. Okay? And as long as their marginal costs are not the same, they can switch. One produces more, one produces less, and the total cost will go down. The total cost is going to be minimized. This is the key. Total cost is going to be minimized when the marginal cost is equal across the two firms. When the marginal cost for firm 1 was lower than for firm 2, then it made sense to expand production here, reduce production here. Okay? And you keep doing that until you get to where the two are equal. And once you get to that point, then you have found the production by each firm that will minimize the total cost of the 200 that we want to produce. So the key is, if we want to minimize total industry cost, we have to produce where marginal cost for the first firm is equal to the marginal cost for the second firm. Okay? Really simple conclusion to state. You own the firms, so if you want to minimize your total cost of production, you just adjust your output at each farm so that on the margin, the costs are the same. Okay? You expand or contract so that the marginal costs are the same across both farms. Okay? This is the principle that, simple to state, okay, but has profound implications. Say it again, to minimize the total industry cost, if you got two farms, all you have to do is adjust production at each one so that the marginal cost is the same across the two firms. Another way to say that would be, you want to produce in such a way that on the margin, they are equally efficient. We know that firm 2 overall is lower cost, but you want to adjust the production levels so that on the margin, their costs are equal. Okay? If both of the if you've only got two farms and they're both owned by you, well, it's a relatively simple situation. On the other hand, what if you own 400 farms? Well, that's going to be all more complicated because you've got 400 different farms or firms to deal with. Okay? But the principle is going to be the same. If there's some amount that you want to produce in total, then you adjust how much you produce at each by each farm so that the marginal cost producing from the first one is equal to the marginal cost of producing from the second one and the third and the fourth, all 400. Okay? It's going to be more complicated than if you just had two farms, but you own them. Presumably, you know what their costs are. You're employing managers who report to you. So the principle you're trying to achieve is, we want the marginal cost to be the same across all 400 of these farms. Okay? In order to achieve that, what would you have to know? Well, you'd have to know the cost for firm 1 and firm 2 and so on. So it's not a simple thing, but these farms all belong to you. You get all of their cost reports. So it would make sense you have the data that you need to answer the question. And you have the incentive, because if you minimize the total cost, then you're going to make more profits than if you don't. Okay? So you have the information and you have the incentive. Now, what if there are 400 firms in this market but they're not owned by the same person. They're 400 independent firms or farms. Okay? How does that change things? If each one of you are running one of these firms, you're not going to tell me what your costs are, and I'm not going to tell you what my costs are. So how can we achieve this outcome?
Doesn't everybody have the same incentive to minimize the costs?
Well, everybody has an incentive to minimize their cost to producing however much they produce. Okay, but is there anybody who's trying to minimize the total industry cost? No. What do they have an incentive to do?
Maximize their own.
They have an incentive to maximize their profit, okay? Which means each firm, let's look at firm one. Each firm is going to produce where marginal revenue equals his marginal cost, okay? And his marginal revenue is going to be the market price. Okay? What is firm two going to do?
Same thing.
He's going to produce, same thing, he's going to produce where his marginal revenue is equal to his marginal cost, and his marginal revenue is just the price. All 400 firms are trying to maximize their own profit. They're doing it by trying to produce where this is true. So you've got the price is going to be equal to firm one's marginal cost, and it's going to be equal to firm two's marginal cost, and the same thing for every other firm. What was the requirement to have minimum total industry cost? You had to have the marginal cost be equated across all of these firms. And when you have a competitive market where all these firms are owned by different people, they're all focusing on different goals, maximizing their own profit. But we are going to end up where marginal cost is going to be the same across all of these firms. They're not intending that, but as they pursue maximum profit, they are going to end up producing where this is true, which is the requirement for total industry cost to be at a minimum. So you get this, what I think is really interesting result, that even though they are all owned by different firms or different owners, the total industry cost is going to be at a minimum because they're all focusing on that common market price. Everything still works great as long as they're profit maximizing firms. But then we ask, what happens if we have 400 firms and they are all run by the government? Okay. The government does not have the cost conditions for any of these firms. The government's going to have to go to them and say, would you please tell us what your costs are? What incentive do they have to give the government that information? Okay. Plus, if it's run by the government, they are not maximizing profit. So that means they are not going to be producing where price and marginal cost are equal. Okay. So the government doesn't have the cost information, and they are not individually matching their marginal cost to the price. So what are the chances that government is going to be able to equate the marginal cost across all these firms? Doesn't matter if they may have the best of intentions, but they don't have the information. They don't have the right signals or incentives to achieve the goal. So the government will not be able to produce the output at as low a cost as the private sector would. I think that's very clear. We're out of time, but this was a headline I saw just yesterday. Biden has a plan for a new national supply commander. The idea is that the government we can create a position in the government where the supply commander can take charge of the supply chain for all essential medical equipment. And the government can make all of these decisions, okay? We've just seen all the things that are required to produce a product efficiently. Is the government going to have that information? Is the government going to have the incentive to use that information? Okay. I don't think so. I'm not saying they're bad people, saying they don't have, we won't go into that. They don't have the information, they don't have an incentive to achieve a good outcome. And the more we go in the direction of having supply commanders, the more bad things are going to happen. All right, we finished the first one. We'll spend a tiny bit of time on the second principle in chapter 12, and most of our time next time will be on chapter 13, which is on monopoly. So I will see you next week, or no. Thursday. That was a test to see if you were paying attention. You were very good. Okay.
I remember you said that last time, and I said, hey, Doug, are we not coming to class Thursday?
Yeah, well, come into class twice a week.